Okay, ready, shreddies? Okay. All right, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday for Social Justice. I'm glad to see you're all here. We've got Amy's here online too, so she's watching, and hopefully a few other people will tune in shortly as well. But let's jump into what we were talking about. Yesterday. So, where we were in all this is, oh man, I think I'm gonna have to upgrade my streaming software because I need to see more. So, we talked a little bit about critical thinking and critical theory, and what we wanted to take from critical theory was the idea that sometimes things that are true are counterintuitive, so they go opposite to what we feel is true or what appears to be true from where we're standing, and that all knowledge has meaning attached to it. And so things that we know and the way in which we know them and the reason we know them in the first place all have to do with the sort of political and social environment that we live in, okay? So we talked about that. We talked about Christopher Columbus as a story that illustrates just those things, right? So it illustrates the fact that this appears to be a very factual story about an explorer discovering a new land, but actually it legitimizes the sort of colonization of North and South America and delegitimizes the genocide of indigenous peoples, right? And so it's a story that is based on fact, but it is told in such a way, and it is told for such a purpose as to legitimize sort of Europeans' colonization of these lands. And so, again, this is a story with a lot of meaning and values and ideas baked into it. It's not just a series of facts, even though it's based on fact. So yeah, what you believe about Christopher Columbus and how you think of him has a lot to do with who has told you the story and why they've told you the story, okay? And so things like statues of Christopher Columbus, the idea that Christopher Columbus has a holiday in some American states, all has to do with legitimizing Europeans' presence here in North America, even though arguably this is not our land. This land belonged to someone else, and we just kind of took it, right? Yeah, so what you think about Columbus depends a little bit on who you are. And again, this brings up the idea that knowledge is socially constructed, and we'll talk about that a little bit more today, the social construction of knowledge. I'm just going to jump ahead because I think we've covered Columbus, and I've got too many slides here in terms of Columbus. Yeah, we talked about all that, blah, blah, blah. Critical thinking. So yesterday we talked about sort of the ground level of critical thinking about how it works and how we can kind of think about it. And it's teaching us to question either our beliefs or beliefs that other people are trying to hand to us and say, hey, believe this, right? And so we want to be able to figure out whether we should actually believe those things in the first place. Are they worth believing or not? And the way we do that is that we evaluate these claims, right? And so a claim is something that someone says is true or is not true, right? And again, we can't evaluate questions this way. We can only evaluate statements. And so what we want to do is look for people trying to claim that things are a certain way or aren't a certain way. Climate change is real. Climate change is not real. Climate change is a hoax. The election is rigged, or no, the election is not rigged. There's widespread voter fraud, or no, actually there's not, right? All of those are claims that people have made, and people have to make a decision about whether or not to believe them, right? And so what we're doing is we're looking for people to make an argument to us, right? And so arguments, we said, are composed of premises and conclusions, right? And so this is kind of the gold standard. We're looking for people to give us an argument that we can evaluate, right? And so if people just simply say there's widespread voter fraud in the United States, people are voting 2 and 3 times, and people who are already dead are somehow voting, and it's all rigged and it's all a mess, that's a claim. But of course, we need evidence, right? We need evidence to believe that. And again, the evidence that has been supplied, well, no evidence has been supplied so far, because in the United States, there is no evidence of those things happening, right? There is no evidence of people voting twice. There's almost no voter fraud in the United States. Dead people are not voting. None of those things are happening. There's no evidence for any of those, but people are claiming those things anyway. But again, we want to look for arguments, right? People stating that something is or isn't the case, and then supporting it with premises and evidence, right? So I gave you a simple little argument here yesterday, and we walked through it, right? And so I've got a little argument that's constructed well, right? I've got a conclusion that I'm trying to convince you of. I have some premises that are meant to give you reasons to believe what I said, right? And I think we agreed yesterday that this is a logical argument, right? It might not be the greatest argument in the history of humankind, but that's not what it's supposed to be. It's a very simple argument, and the premises here logically support the conclusion. There are reasons why someone might drink coffee, and all of my premises are either true or mostly true, or at least we can imagine a case in which I could prove them to you, right? Or I could try to prove them to you. And so we evaluated this argument according to those two things. Are the premises logical support for the conclusion, and are they true? And again, I think we agreed that we have mostly true premises, or premises that I could prove to you, and they logically support the conclusion, right? And so then I asked you to come up with your own arguments. And so we had a few arguments from the audience here. We had a few audience that came to us from online. And those are all really good. I think you had a very kind of intuitive understanding of how they worked. We heard some good arguments. And so I think we're off to a good start, critical thinking wise. That wasn't supposed to happen. Oh, that's because I was on. I see what happened. Okay, that's no problem. That's why there were so many Columbus slides, because there wasn't. I got it. Okay. Just to make sure that we understand this, let me offer you some simple arguments here, okay? These are very simple, maybe even more simple than the coffee one. So this is a simple argument. Because assault rifles, so the types of guns that go brrrr, because assault rifles have no peaceful civilian use, the Canadian government should ban assault rifles. So what's the conclusion there? What are we being asked to believe?
Government should ban assault rifles.
Right, the government should ban assault rifles. And so again, as good critical thinkers, we should say, why should we ban those things? And so what's the premise here? Right, there's no peaceful use that regular people can have for these guns, right? These guns are simply made to kill people, therefore the government should ban them. Good. Again, it's not a fantastic argument. It's very simple and very basic, but we're just starting out here. What about this one? The Globe and Mail's report on business says that people should invest heavily in stocks. Therefore, investing in stocks is a smart move. If you don't know, the Globe and Mail is a newspaper here in Canada, and so they write for all of Canada. It's a pretty good paper, actually. So what are we being asked to believe? What's the conclusion here? That you should invest in stocks. Okay. Good critical thinkers. Why should I do that thing? Because?
High rate in return.
Maybe, but that's not what they're arguing. Because it's a smart move. And why is it a smart move? Right, because the Globe and Mail report on business says that it's a smart move, right? And so if you're kind of thinking, is there anything missing here? Maybe like a missing premise? Yeah, why do they say it's a smart move, or who are they and should we believe them, right? So if you wanted to sort of fill out this argument a little bit, you could say that the Globe and Mail's report on business is widely seen as a financial authority in Canada, right? So then you know that the Globe and Mail's report on business, that they know what they're talking about, and so they say investing in stocks is a smart move. And so what should you do? You should invest, right? You should invest in stocks. So there's kind of a missing premise there, right? You're kind of assuming that the Globe and Mail report on business actually knows what they're talking about. But if you wanted to fill out the argument a little bit, you could actually say that as a premise, that they actually are an authority in this area. Okay, that's good. How about this one? When Joseph takes the bus, he's always late. And he's taking the bus today, so I'm sure he's going to be late. What are we being asked to believe there? Joseph is late. Today, Joseph is going to be late. Why on earth should we believe that? Because he's taking the bus? Or no, wait, hang on. Okay, yes. Not quite. Okay, so Joseph is going to be late today. Why should we believe that? Because when he takes the bus, he is late. And today he's taking the bus, right? So those are our two premises. Joseph's going to be late today is the conclusion. Why should we believe that? Because every time that guy takes the bus, he is late. And today, on the bus. Okay? Wow. This movie is on iTunes, but it was never even shown in theaters. This is pre-COVID, by the way. It was never shown in theaters. It is not a good sign when a movie goes straight to iTunes without ever being shown in theaters. It must be pretty bad. What are we being asked to believe here? The movie is bad, okay? The movie is bad is our conclusion. Why should we believe the movie is bad? It was never shown in theaters. Right? When a movie isn't shown in theaters or when it goes straight to iTunes, usually not that good, right? So we have two premises here, that movies that aren't shown in theaters and go right to iTunes, those are usually bad movies. And this movie, that's exactly what happened, right? It went straight to iTunes, so probably pretty bad, right? Of course, now COVID, things are not going to theaters, and sometimes they're going on Disney Plus and Netflix, and so this whole argument is COVID has invalidated the whole thing. Okay, one more. No one should buy a beer that is brewed in the United States. Old Guzzler beer is brewed in the United States, so no one should buy it. What are we being asked to believe here? Not quite, but close. That's part of it. Yeah, don't buy, you should not buy Old Guzzler beer. This one's tricky because its conclusion is kind of broken into two bits, right? So you should not buy Old Guzzler beer. Why should you not buy this type of beer? It is brewed in the United States, and what do we know about beer from the United States? It is not good. Nobody should buy it, right? So again, this one's a little tricky because they've broken it up, but no one should buy, or you should not buy Old Guzzler beer. Why not? Because it was brewed in the United States, and no one should buy beer from the United States. And actually, that's a true argument. But anyway, I won't go into that. Right, so that's exactly what we just talked about there. How about this? The cost of the new XJ fighter jet is $650 million. The cost of 3 AR-21 bombers is $1.2 billion. The Canadian government intends to fund such projects. So my question here is there an argument here? Argument?
No.
Kang says no. Say that one more time.
The Canadian government is trying to make a project that costs.
Right. So we're being told that the government is going to spend money on these two military airplanes, right? Or these military projects. We're being told that, but is it an argument? No, no, no.
Want us to believe something. It's just information. It's just a statement.
Right. It's just a statement, right? So it's not trying to convince us of anything. It's just simply telling us that. So we have three statements here. The three statements are related, but they are not. They're not trying to convince us of any particular thing, right? They're just kind of informing us. But we could make them into an argument. So there is no argument there, but I'm going to add a few sentences and I'm going to turn it into an argument. Okay, Canada's Auditor General. Auditor General, if you don't know, most governments have one, and they just kind of check up on people and make sure that they're spending their government money wisely. That's Auditor General's job. Auditor General says that any weapon that costs more than $50 million will actually impair our military readiness. So it's actually going to hurt our ability, our military's ability to be ready. The cost of the fighter jet is $650 million. That's from before. The cost of the bombers is $1.2 million. That was from before too. We should never impair our military readiness. Therefore, the Canadian government should cancel both of these expensive projects. So now we have an argument. What's our conclusion here? Right. The government should cancel both of these projects. Why should they cancel them? Yes, but we want to pull that apart a little more. I don't know where to go. Avera, what were you going to say? Okay. Yes, but I'm going to put that at the end. So yes, but there's one before that. Yeah. So the government should cancel both of these projects. Why should we believe that? Well, the Auditor General is saying that expensive military purchases actually impair military readiness. And so we have two projects here. Both of them are over that $50 million price tag. And we should never impair our military readiness, right? So the government should cancel these projects. Why? Because projects over 50 million impair our readiness. This first one is more expensive. The second one is more expensive. And we don't want to do that, right? We don't want to impair our military readiness. So again, we started out with something that wasn't an argument. It was just statements. But now it's trying to convince us of something, right? It's trying to convince us that the government should cancel these projects. Good, good, good. Okay. Yes. Yes. One last one. Okay. Alicia went to the bank to get a more recent bank statement of her checking account. So this example is from like 300 years ago when you wanted to find out how much money you had in your bank account, you had to go to the bank and get them to fill out your bank book. You actually had a paper bank book, or you had to stick it in the machine and it would print it out. Nobody does that anymore because we have apps and smartphones, but in the Stone Age, that's how people figured out how much money they had. So Alicia went to the bank to get a more recent bank statement of her checking account. The teller told her that the balance was $125. Alicia was shocked that it was so low. She called her brother to see if he had been playing one of his twisted pranks. He was not. Finally, she concluded that she had been a victim of bank fraud. So, is this an argument?
Yeah.
Yes?
Oh, no.
No? Maybe? Yes, no, maybe? What are we being asked to believe? If it's an argument, then we're being asked to believe something. Okay, so maybe the conclusion of this argument is that Alicia has been a victim of bank fraud. Okay, so if that's our conclusion, we need premises, right? We need support for that argument or for that conclusion. So, okay, Alicia's been a victim of bank fraud. Why should we believe that? Let's look for some premises. Okay, so she went to get a bank statement. Okay, that's fine. Her balance was $125. Is that a reason why someone might believe that they have been a victim of bank fraud? No, there's nothing. Okay. Alicia was shocked that it was so low. Is that a reason that someone might be a victim of bank fraud? No, I'm shocked at my bank balance all the time. I wish I was a victim of bank fraud, but unfortunately, it's just that I have no money. So that's no good. Her brother was not playing a prank on her. Is that a reason why someone might be a victim of bank fraud? No, people don't play pranks on us all the time, and it doesn't mean bank fraud. Okay, and so she concluded. So, do we really have an argument here? Not really, right? We're kind of just being told a little story. Alicia might be doing some critical thinking here, and she might be, trying to put things together, but it's not really an argument. It's just kind of a little descriptive story about, her bank balance. So there's no argument to be had here. And so that's kind of the useful thing about doing those steps to the critical thinking, because if you ask yourself the questions, even if you mistakenly think that you have an argument here, when you kind of go through it, you're like, oh, it's not trying to convince me of anything. There's really no evidence for bank fraud here at all, at least not from what we're being given, right? Again, Alicia might be doing some critical thinking, but the way that it's given to us, it's just a little story, right? Yeah. And the last one is not to confuse an argument with an explanation, right? So explanations tell us why something is the case, but arguments try to convince us of something, okay? So, whoops, am I missing a... Yeah, I'm missing a slide, but that's okay. So here's a quick example. So let's see. So Sabrina stole the money, okay? Sabrina stole the money. 3 people saw her do it, okay? Or Sabrina stole the money, but she needed the money to buy food, okay? So 2 statements about Sabrina stealing the money, but the second one is an explanation, right? Because it's not trying to convince you that Sabrina stole it. It's saying, yeah, she stole it, but it's trying to explain why, right? The first one is an argument because it's trying to prove to you that she did it, right? So Sabrina stole the money, and then it gives you evidence, right, that 3 people actually saw this happen. So explanations are not arguments and vice versa, okay? Good so far? Okay. We're going to leave critical thinking for a second, and I'm just going to check and make sure. I'm just going to make sure that we're there. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, and so Amy's here, Sam is online today, George is online today, as is Daniel, and I think that's Vicky. So yeah, good morning to all of you. All right. All right, so okay. Our next topic here is going to talk a little bit about socialization and about culture, okay? And so this is a little more in line with what I teach in my anthropology classes when I teach it, but this is going to be really important for us because a lot of the ways in which social inequality occurs and the way that we experience it, the reason that it exists in the first place, and the reason why it is so hard to fix directly has to do with culture and socialization. Okay, so in order to kind of understand all of these different things like racism and sexism and religious oppression that we'll talk about later, we have to understand what culture is and how socialization operates, okay? So, the first thing we'll need to know is what culture is. And if I asked you what it is, what would you tell me? What's culture?
Origin, your religion.
Okay. So your origin and also maybe your religion, your traditions, where you're from, your environment. What defines you? What else?
Your belief.
Your beliefs,
Behavior of society.
your behavior and how society behaves overall. Good. The way you think. What else?
Practices of a certain group of people.
Practices of a certain group of people. Good. What else?
Food, costing.
Yeah, so the foods you eat and the way you prepare them and the way that you dress, right? What else?
How do you act in society?
How you act in society, yeah. Say again? How you were raised, yeah.
History of the city or the, yeah.
Right, your history or the story of your people and where they come from and what's happened to them in the past, yeah. What else?
Your
Your ancestors, okay. Anything else? You're all right, by the way. All of these are parts of culture. And so culture is an important thing to know about because you're correct. It has to do with the way we're raised, the way we think, the things that we believe, the way that we behave in society, our understanding of where we come from and what's happened to people in the past, and how we kind of go about our daily lives, right? What we eat, what we drink, the way we dress, the way we interact with other people, the way that we understand and interact with the environment. All those things are important parts of culture. And so for our purposes, it's very important to understand what culture is because of the way that humans are. And so humans are kind of a strange type of animal, if you probably know that already instinctively, but we're kind of a strange type of animal, and we're strange in a number of ways, but one of the ways in which we're strange is that we're actually born with very little in terms of pre-wired behavioral programming, okay? So when a little baby is born and they pop out, they don't really have much programming wired into their brain. They don't really know how to do anything, right? They don't know how to speak, they don't know how to eat, they don't know how to communicate, they don't know how to walk, nothing, right? They cannot take care of themselves. They're entirely helpless. And they're helpless actually for quite some time, right? Most animals that we've seen, if you've ever seen an animal in the wild being born, they are on their way very quickly, right? If you've seen a cow being born, maybe, cows are up on their feet almost immediately, right? And they know how to walk, they know how to communicate with their mothers, they know how to eat. And so many animals are born pre-wired to know how to do things, but we, interestingly, are not. One of the metaphors I like to use here, and I think it's a pretty good one, is that our physical bodies and our brains are kind of like hardware, okay? So if you imagine them like a computer, and our culture is basically our software. It's basically our operating system. And so humans, for this metaphor, are basically born without an operating system installed. And so has anyone ever seen a computer like a PC or something without Windows installed in it? Probably not. No. You probably haven't seen one because it doesn't really do anything with no operating system, unless you're, a coder and you know how to sort of go into the root menu and start typing commands. The computer doesn't do anything because it doesn't know how, right? The operating system is what teaches it how to do things. So if you've got a PC and you've got Windows, or if you've got a Mac with OS 10, that's what teaches the computer how to do things, right? How to go on the internet, or how to watch a video, or how to check your email, or open up a document of some kind. All of that, the computer needs the operating system to do. And without it, the computer doesn't do much. And so culture, for our purposes, I think you can imagine as our operating system, right? But again, we're born without it, and it needs to be installed, right? We need a progress bar of about 15 to 20 years for the entire operating system to get installed. And this is a process that we've all been through, right? We've all, I hope, we've all had our operating system installed from the culture that we've actually been born into, right? And so this process is something that anthropologists call enculturation, okay? So we're taught our culture, all of those things that you just told me about, beliefs and values and religious ideas and behavioral norms and ways of thinking and ways of interacting with people, all of those things are taught to us through this process of enculturation. And it happens really throughout our lifetime. We're still being enculturated because I might be jumping ahead here, but once we learn those behavioral norms, we reinforce them with each other, right? We make sure that other people follow the rules. And if other people don't, we kind of give them a funny look, or try to get them to follow the rule again. And so we are enculturated, but then once we learn that culture, we reinforce it with other people, right? We continually teach each other how to behave in the correct way, right? So this is the process that we learn all of those beliefs and norms and values and practices that are part of our culture. We should probably add, actually this is an important point, that this is involuntary, right? Nobody chooses the culture that they're born into, and nobody chooses to be enculturated, right? You cannot escape your process of enculturation, right? So I was born in Canada, I grew up in Canada, I was enculturated in Canada by a Canadian family, and there's really nothing I can do about that. I cannot undo that process of enculturation, right? It's already happened. I've been educated in a certain way. I've been taught in a certain way. It happens whether you like it or not, and you can't really escape it, and you can't really set it aside either. You can't set aside your enculturation or in any way, really. You can be aware of it, right? So I can be aware of the ways in which I've been taught. I can be aware of some of the beliefs and values that have been given to me, but I can't undo that process, right? That process has already happened. So this is the downloading of our operating system. And the other thing I'll point out here is that everything that you do is basically a cultural act, okay? So often when we think of cultural acts or cultural behaviors, we think of, rituals or dances or, particular things that a culture does. But really everything you do is cultural. So I got up this morning and I brushed my teeth, right? And most people wouldn't see that as a cultural act, but it is, right? Because my culture teaches me that you should brush your teeth when you get up in the morning because you want to take care of your teeth. You don't want them to, get cavities and fall out of your head because that's bad. You want to have, fresh breath, because if you don't have fresh breath, people might not want to talk to you. And so those are cultural ideas. And so my culture has taught me to brush my teeth every morning, and so I do. That's a cultural act. And so everything you do can basically be interpreted this way, as a cultural act, as something you have been taught to do, because most of the things that us human beings do in the course of our day are not natural, right? They're not pre-wired into us. We're all breathing right now. That's pre-wired. And we're all kind of listening and looking. But after that, everything that you're kind of doing and thinking, and the ways in which you're behaving, and the choices that you make, all of those things are cultural, right? And so that's important to remember as well. Okay, so this is what we'll say that culture is. And it's actually a definition that's very closely aligned with what you all just told me, right? That culture is a system of beliefs and values and customs and behaviors and artifacts. Artifacts are physical objects like this thing here that are common to members of a society. And so all of those things you mentioned, I think, with the exception of systems. And so it's important to remember that all of these things are going to work together, right? They're all going to be, the beliefs and values and behaviors are all going to be connected in the way that we behave with each other, okay? And I've showed you this. I think I've showed you this before. I'm showing it to you now. I'll show it to you again. And this is kind of a graphic representation of what culture is, but of course it's not all of it, right? So everything you see here listed on the iceberg is part of culture, but culture is an immense set of procedures and behaviors and information. And that's why it takes so long to teach, right? Even after 10 years, 10 whole years, are you completely matured and do you know everything you need to know? No, you're just a 10-year-old kid. You don't know anything, right? And so what about when you're 15? Are you done? No. What about when you're 20? Are you done?
Far from that.
What's that?
Far from that.
Far from that. What about when you're 44? Are you done? Really? Still? No, we're not, right? Human beings still learn things at 44 and past that even. And so you could almost imagine this process of enculturation as a lifelong thing, right? Particularly because cultures kind of evolve and change over time, right? So not only do we have to learn these things, but the things that we learned 10 years ago, may be slightly different now. Our values may have shifted, or social norms may have shifted, right? Social norms are shifting now. Do we shake hands with people anymore?
Not right now.
Not right now, right? Normally, again, I can't speak for all of your countries, but here in the West, we often do, right? When you meet someone, you give them a good solid handshake. But because of COVID, now we're not doing that, right? And so it'll be interesting once we get on the other side of this whole COVID thing, it'll be interesting to see if people continue that social custom of handshakes, or if they don't do that anymore and maybe we adopt something else, right? In Japan, you bow to people, right? Yeah, and so maybe that's something that we'll pick up because you don't have to touch anyone to do it. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But again, that's just one custom that is evolving and changing. And so for probably hundreds of years, we've shaken people's hands. Now we're not doing it. Once COVID is over, hopefully, fingers crossed, maybe that won't be the custom anymore. Maybe there'll be a new custom that people will have to learn. And but all of these things that you see in the iceberg are different aspects of culture. And like I mentioned before, kind of the deeper you go into this, the more strongly people believe in these things and the more emotional attachment they have to these things, and the more natural they seem, okay? And so, things at the top are kind of more superficial, more flexible. people aren't as emotionally tied to them. But when you get deeper here, these concepts tend to be more stable and sort of people tend to hold on to them more tightly, right? Yeah, things like the concept of the self, right? People, maybe I'll talk about this for a minute. People tend to hold on to the idea very tightly that you are you, right? And so philosophers like to talk about this sometimes because you kind of all know who you are, right? More or less. You kind of know, like Anna kind of knows who Anna is, right? Kang, you kind of know who that person is, or you're learning anyway. But philosophers sometimes like to point out that what is the self, right? If you look at the brain, for instance, there's no spot in the brain where the self is, right? There's no little place where, there's a tiny little Avera in there, looking out of Avera's eyes and pressing buttons and pulling there's nothing in the brain that's like that, right? There's no little spot that is Avera, right? So where does that come from? Where does that idea of the self come from? And it's kind of a story that people tell themselves, but sometimes philosophers like to debate the idea that maybe there is no such thing as a self. Maybe it's just a story you tell yourself about your history, right? You take all the things that have happened to you and you create a picture of who you are, but that's not really real. It's just a story because there's no part of your brain that's actually you. I don't know. We don't have to dig into that, but people tend to, it's an important part of culture, right? We're taught that we have a self, right? That there is something about us that is uniquely us. And when I asked you, I think, a couple days ago about your identity, about what makes you you, you told me a bunch of things that had to do with the self, right? You said you were funny or outgoing or boring or lazy or whatever. And all of those things were describing the self, were describing you. But some people would debate the fact that there is no self, but we are taught to believe that there is. And it would be a very uncomfortable feeling, I think, for some people to engage with the idea that who you think you are is imaginary, right? There is no person that you think of as you, and there is no place in your brain where you reside. But anyway, we don't have to get into that. This is not a philosophy class. I'm not a philosopher. We don't need to deal with that. One question we could ask is that where do all of these beliefs and values come from? And this is an important point for this class as well, because humans kind of invent them on their own. Many anthropologists, I'm going to use Clifford Geertz here as an example, he suggests that all humans are compelled to give meanings to their experiences. And so humans want to know why, right? Humans want to know why things are the way they are. When, the skies are smoky, humans want to know why, right? My cat looks out the window, she doesn't care, right? She just looks out the window, sees what she sees, and goes on with her day. But humans look at the sky and they're like, why? Why is it like that, right? When water falls from the sky, why does that happen, right? What is going on? Humans want to know what things mean. And so humans are constantly trying to apply meaning to their lives. They're constantly trying to figure out what is going on, right? In a way that most animals don't, right? And I think sometimes we envy animals for that reason, right? Is that they, dogs run around and have fun and get dirty and jump all over people, and they just seem to be having a good time. They don't care what it all means, right? They're just enjoying their lives. And so sometimes we, I think, envy them for that. But Clifford Geertz here mentions that humans have a very strong desire to give meaning to our experience, because otherwise it would be kind of pointless and confusing, and we wouldn't really know what we were supposed to do or why we're here, or why is our environment the way it is? Why is there water falling from the sky? Why did that person look at me that way? What's going on? Why is it dark now? Why is it light later on? Right? There's all these questions that humans, probably because of our increased cognitive ability, that we want to know, right? We want to know why things are happening. And so humans are compelled to give meaning to their experiences. And he also says that humans are incomplete or unfinished animals that complete themselves through culture. And so, again, that's related to the sort of computer operating system metaphor, right? The idea that we are born, but we need something to complete ourselves. We need something to allow us to fully realize what a human being is, and that thing is culture. Yeah, so we need to impose meaning on things. We want to know the why in a way that most animals don't need to know. Yeah, so to be a living human, which we all are, right? Nobody in here is a zombie or a vampire. You don't have to disclose if you're a vampire, it's okay. To be a living human is to be a practitioner of culture, right? So everything you do is cultural. But also, to be a living human is to be a maker of meaning, right? You ascribe meaning to your experiences. You look back at your life to this point, and you try to put it into a story that makes sense to you, right? There's some sort of meaning for your life. You have some kind of purpose. You are working towards some kind of goal, right? So humans do this all the time, right? The idea of the self is one such thing, right? We've all done this. We've all looked at our past, we've remembered all of the things that have happened to us, and we have made meaning out of that, right? We've assembled an idea of who we are based on all the things that have happened to us, right? That's making meaning, and we've all done that, and we're all in the process of doing that. And I think particularly this sort of stage of life that most of you are at, that's an important thing, right? You're trying to give meaning to that experience. You're trying to figure out who you are and who you might be later on, right? That's something that kind of happens. Right. So this is what we'll imagine culture is. We'll say that it's this complex operating system for humans, right? It's a Windows or an OS 10, and it contains all kinds of knowledge. It contains symbolic information, right? So humans talk to themselves or communicate in symbols all the time. Behavioral instructions, right? Ways to behave, and ideals that we have downloaded into our brains by other people, right? People teach us this stuff, usually our parents or our guardians or our caregivers, and other people in our family as well, and other people in society, right? We all are constantly enculturating each other. And this is what kind of allows us to be fully human, but also to cooperate with other humans, right? That shared set of ideas and values and beliefs and behaviors, that's what allows us to work so well as a group. And again, that's something that human beings do quite well also, right? We cooperate with each other, we work together in order to accomplish things. Okay, so that brings us to socialization, but I think this is a good place to have a little break because the look on Sabrina's face looks like I need a 10-minute break. So take a 10-minute break, come back, and then we'll talk about socialization, okay? Okay, and we're back a little bit late,
You can calm down.
but that's okay. What's that?
Calm down.
I know I ran all the way back because I didn't want you to miss even a minute of your educational experience here.
Just calm down. You don't panic.
No, I'm good. So, before we went on break, we were talking about what culture is, right? And so we said it's this very complex operating system that humans download into other humans, and it allows us to kind of behave in society and cooperate with each other, right? It teaches us how to interact with the environment and interact with each other. Now, I want to bring in this term because now I'm going to do something awful and I'm going to pull a little switch in terms of the word that I use. And so the reason I'm doing this is because I think it was useful to start out talking about culture because culture is something that anthropologists study. And so when anthropologists talk about enculturation, that's the term they use. Sociologists, however, use the word socialization. And so socialization and enculturation are basically the same thing. There's some slight differences, but I think for our purposes we'll use socialization, okay? And so a sociologist would say basically the same thing, that humans are creatures that learn behavior, they learn how to operate within their society, and they need to be enculturated, or they need to be, hey Zerlinda, or they need to be socialized, okay? And so going forward, that's probably the term that we'll use here because this course is a little more of a sociology course than it is an anthropology course. So I'm sorry about the bait and switch that I did here, but we'll use the word socialization. But again, for our purposes, they mean the same thing. They're just slightly different, but don't worry about it. Enculturation, socialization, same difference, okay? And so sociologists are saying something very similar to what anthropologists say, and so, but slightly different. So Emil Durkheim, who you may not have heard of, but if you take a sociology course, you'll definitely hear about him because he's a big name in sociology. He says that humans actually cannot exist without society, and they can't really develop without interaction with other humans. This is actually a very interesting thing. Has anyone ever heard of feral children? F-E-R-A-L? Children that grew up in the wild, yeah. Anyone seen The Jungle Book? Or is it, what's it called on Netflix? Is it Mowgli?
Mowgli.
Is that what it was called? Yeah, it was kind of a Jungle Book thing, but it was with animated animals that talked and things like that. Okay. So The Jungle Book or Mowgli or whatever, he's a fictional version of a feral child, but there actually have been real feral children found in the wild, historically speaking. And so the story usually goes is that small children are either abandoned or they get lost in the woods or their parents are killed. I think with Mowgli, his parents are killed, are they not? Or how does he wind up in the jungle? Nobody knows? Nobody knows? Okay.
I know how Tarzan ended up in the jungle, but I don't know.
Tarzan's another fictional version of a feral child. But in real life, the feral children, the few feral children that have been raised or grown up in the jungle or the forest and then have been found later on, a very interesting thing happens. And so often these children are lost in the jungle when they're really quite small. They somehow manage to survive several years and then they're discovered or found, and people sort of bring them back into civilization and try to teach them things, right? Try to teach them how to, basically what they try to do is they try to enculturate them, right? They try to socialize them and teach them how to speak and how to interact with people and how to wear clothes and eat food with forks and knives and all kinds of things. But what's really interesting is that it often doesn't work very well. And so what they find is that say a child was lost in the woods when they were 4 years old or in the jungle, and they were discovered again when they were 10 or 12. And so well-meaning people try to teach these children how to speak and how to dress and how to act. And what they find is that their intellectual capacity is actually quite limited. And so you can give them language lessons for the rest of their lives, but they will really only attain the language level of maybe, a 7 or 8 year old child at the most. They're never able to go above that. They're never able to read or speak or write in a more sophisticated way like all of us can. And what happens is that as the brain develops, when children's brains are developing, there's certain points where the brain is ready to be wired. And so when you're a little baby, or if you've been around little babies, you'll see they start to talk, right? At a certain age, they start to babble and they start to try to imitate what adults say, and adults try and coach them, and they come up with little funny ways of saying words, and it's very cute, but then you correct them, right? I have a friend of a friend, they have a small boy, and he says, for carrots, he says, kiwit. It's a kiwit, which is very cute, right? But of course, you're supposed to correct him and say, no, it's a carrot, right? You try to fix it. But kids kind of instinctively start to speak, and adults train them to speak. And so as that happens, the brain is kind of wiring and growing and creating connections based on that language acquisition. But if that doesn't happen, if you are not taught to speak at that age, there's really only that certain time period where the brain is wiring that way. And so if you're not taught to speak when you're that age, then those connections kind of don't form and they shut down. And so, and they don't form again ever, really. And so these feral children are not really able to speak at a sophisticated level because their brain just wasn't wired to do that in the beginning, and it's not possible to duplicate that wiring after the brain is developed to a certain point. And so that's kind of the physiological reason behind it, but it's a physiological reason, but this is kind of what Emil Durkheim is saying right here, right? He's saying that humans cannot exist without society or develop without interaction with other humans. So part of what makes us human is not only our culture or our socialization, but actually the process of being socialized. So it's not just, human plus culture, or not, human animal plus culture equals human being. Humans actually need to interact with other humans. They actually need to be taught by them in order for the brain to wire in the way that we are all used to. And if you don't get that interaction or socialization, then your brain doesn't wire the same. And yeah, which is kind of pretty remarkable, right? Emil also says that society allows humans to feel connected to something larger than themselves and to feel connected to each other, right? And so I think we've all kind of instinctively felt this sort of belonging, right? And so sometimes we feel it in terms of our culture. We might definitely feel it if we come to a different country or a different culture. We might really notice how strongly we want to feel connected to our home country, right? When I was doing my grad program, I spent a lot of time in Russia, and I never felt more strongly Canadian as when I was in Russia, because you want to like hang on to that part of your identity, right? You want to feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself, and that can be your family, it can be your culture, it can be your religion, it can be your country, but I think we can all probably instinctively agree that there is some part of us as humans that want to be part of something bigger, right? We want to be part of a social group. Even if it's, maybe it's an online gaming community, maybe it's fans of a certain music group or fans of a certain sports team, right? All of those things, we want to be part of something larger. And Emil Durkheim says that's an important thing for humans as well, to be part of a larger group that they feel connected to. We're not solitary animals, right? We don't go off and, live in the woods by ourselves like a bear or something like that. We're group animals. We're social animals. We live together, and we want to be part of a group. We want to be part of a community. And so Emil here is saying that this is also part of what makes human beings human, is our desire to interact with others, even though sometimes others are a bit much and we need a break, but our desire to interact with each other, and our desire to cooperate with each other as well, right? And again, cooperation is something humans do very well, and we do all the time, right? It's one of the secrets to our success as a species. Right. Yes. So during this socialization process, we learn the sort of meanings and behaviors that allow us to operate within society, right? So all societies have an acceptable set of behaviors and ways that you're expected to act, and we all learn our role, right? And so this is another sociological thing that I won't dig into too much, but I think it's Irving. Is it Irving Goffman? A sociologist who suggests that humans are, in part, socialized to play roles. And so it's just like an actor taking on a role in the theater or in a movie. We all are taught to perform our roles in society. And so you all right now are performing the role of student, right? And you know how to perform that role, right? You're supposed to come in and you're supposed to sit down and you're supposed to listen to me, or at least try to pretend that you're listening to me. And maybe you're supposed to write notes, and you know that you're going to have a test or an assignment eventually, and you know that you're supposed to try to do as well as you can, right? You know all of these things, right? And you instinctively come into a classroom and you know how to perform your role, right? And similarly, I have a role to play here as well, right? I know that I'm supposed to be a teacher, and I'm supposed to know things, and I'm supposed to be polite and supportive to you and explain things to you. And if you're not paying attention to me, I'm supposed to say, hey, pay attention to me, right? I have a role to play as well. And we very much want each other to perform our roles well, right? I want you to perform the role of student well because that's what we're kind of conditioned to want, right? Do you want me to perform my role as teacher? Or do you want me to just put my feet up and go on Twitter and say, just do whatever you want, you guys, I'm busy? No, right? You want me to perform my role, and you want me to act in the way that we are used to teachers acting, right? So, and that extends to all roles in society, whether you're a sister or a brother or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a husband or a wife or a father or a mother or whatever you are. We're all given roles to play, and we want each other to perform our roles properly, and we actually want to perform our roles as well, because if we do, other people will reward us, right? So lots of aspects of our socialization become kind of hardwired into us, and we absorb them, and then we perform those roles and we perform those behaviors even without thinking about it, okay? Think about, I would normally demonstrate this in class, but because of COVID, I won't. But let's say Adel and I, we bump into each other waiting for the SkyTrain, okay? So we both happen to get to the SkyTrain station at the same time, and we're like, oh, hey, how's it going? And we talk. Now, Adel and I will find an appropriate distance to stand when we're talking to one another, right? We'll be, we'll find an appropriate distance to stand apart from each other. And maybe it's, again, we would demo it normally, but I'm not going to do it now. But we'd probably be about, I don't know, let's say 1.5 meters, maybe just a little more, give or take. Does that sound like about right? How far is that? Maybe we'd stand about that far apart, pre-COVID times. Anyway, Adel and I would find kind of a comfortable distance to stand apart from each other. And what's interesting is that we would kind of know the correct distance, right? And so if I saw you on the SkyTrain station and I went up to talk to you and I stood about that far away from you, you would probably want to back up, right? You'd be like, okay, it's a little close. I'm just going to back up, right? And so similarly, if you came up to me and you stood really, really close, I would be like, okay, I'm just going to back off a little bit. That's a little close, no problem, right? And we all do this, right? We all know the right distance to stand apart from each other based on our relationship. But does anyone ever teach us that? No. You just kind of know, right? You just kind of know what's the right distance to stand from someone else. And of course, it depends on who that person is, right? If you're talking to your brother or your sister or your parent, you'll stand closer, right? If you're talking to someone who you have a romantic relationship with, you might stand even closer. If you're talking to someone that you really don't like, you might stand much further away. But the funny thing is that we've kind of absorbed this idea of how far to stand from someone when you're talking to them, but nobody's ever taught us, right? Nobody ever said this is how far apart you stand. You just kind of know, right? And so lots of human behaviors are like that. You kind of just absorb the right way to act or behave, and nobody really taught you. But if somebody violates the rule, it feels weird, right? So if I bump into Adel at the SkyTrain station and I go and I stand really close to him, I'm going to be breaking a social rule, right? It's too close, and he's going to be like, okay, you're breaking a rule. I feel uncomfortable. I'm going to back up just a little bit until I feel comfortable, right? And then everything's okay again. But if I take a step towards him, then he's going to be like, oh, breaking the social rule again. I'm going to back up. So that's kind of what's interesting about these social rules, is that sometimes we're taught directly what to do, but sometimes we just absorb them, right? We just kind of know instinctively how you're supposed to act or what you're supposed to say or how far apart to stand. And again, when somebody breaks the rule, it feels uncomfortable, right? If I stand this far away from Adel at the SkyTrain station, nothing bad's going to happen, right? Even if we're standing a little bit close to each other, right? Pre-COVID, nothing bad is going to happen, right? Nothing aggressive. We're just having a friendly conversation. But still, the rule is being broken, right? And so Adel's going to feel a little bit uncomfortable, and he's going to try to make himself feel comfortable again. And he's going to do it by just casually backing up just a bit, and then he's going to be fine, okay? And again, there's tons and tons of little social rules like that, right? Things that ways that we're expected to behave, rules that we're expected to follow, and when we don't, sometimes people get a little bit uncomfortable, and they try to get people following the rule again. And so if I stand too close, then Adel's going to back up a little bit, and then it's going to be like, okay, the rule is being followed, the correct social distance has been reestablished, everything's fine. Until I take a step towards him again, and then he's going to be like, okay, the rule is being broken again. So, and I think, I don't know, can you think of other kind of rules or social behaviors that are like that, where people can accidentally make you feel uncomfortable if they break the rule? Okay, how are you thinking?
Like the way I talk to you and the way I talk to you are probably different, and the topics that we talk about would be different as well.
Yeah, what you're referring to, I'm not sure if this is a sociology or anthropology thing, maybe a linguistic thing, but it's code switching. And so humans are very good at code switching. And so Yeah, Sabrina might talk to me slightly differently than she talks to Avera. She might talk to her grandparents in a totally different way than she talks to either Avera or me. And we all do that, right? We all switch in terms of how we speak, the things we talk about, the way you act, the words that you use or don't use, right? And so humans are very good at that, right? We can switch back and forth into different modes of communication. That's good. What else? Other ways that people might.
When we're eating food, we should not make sound with our mouth when we're eating.
Right. So when you're eating, you're not supposed to make a bunch of noises, right? You're not supposed to do that. What about chewing with your mouth open? Mouth open or mouth closed? Open. That's how you get all the air in, right? And the flavors. But again, I can't speak for everyone's country or culture here, but here in the West, you're supposed to chew with your mouth closed. And if you go out on a date with someone and you go to a restaurant and you start chewing with your mouth open, it's going to be a very short date, right? Because you're violating a social rule. The other person is going to be made uncomfortable, right? Or they're going to be grossed out by your open-mouthed chewing, and they're going to end the date with you. But again, will anything bad happen if somebody chews with their mouth open? No, right? Nothing bad will happen. It's no big deal, but it's a social rule. And when we break it, people have a reaction, right? And so, again, standing too close, maybe acting the wrong way, right? Using the wrong set of behaviors or language to speak to one another, chewing with your mouth open. All of those things are little rule breaks, and they make people feel uncomfortable, right? And so often we try to get people to follow the rules, right? And so if you want to be direct, you might say, hey, can you chew with your mouth closed? Because I don't want to see all of your food, right? I don't think there's any more subtle way to do that, is there? If somebody's chewing with their mouth open, you pretty much have to tell them, right? There's no way to imply that they should chew with their mouth closed.
Sometimes it's just it's who they are. I don't know, from where I come from, when that happens, we just choose to we don't address it to them. It's kind of we hope they realize on their own.
Right, because, and that's actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's another social rule, right? In some cases, there's rude behavior, but in some cases it's actually rude to point out the rude behavior, almost, right? So, if somebody's chewing with their mouth open, it's almost, in some cases it's almost overly aggressive to say, hey, can you chew with your mouth closed? Because you're really grossing me out. You're not encouraged to do that either, right? So that's kind of interesting. You just kind of let it go, right? And say, okay, I guess they chew with their mouth open, right? Anything else that you can think of? Little rule breaks that people.
To do things at a certain time, eat at a certain time, sleep at a certain time, and when someone finds out that, oh, I eat at
3 a.m.
3
Right, there are normal meal times, right? And so if you tell someone that you have your dinner at 3 a.m., they will probably look at you a little strangely, right? If you tell them you have your dinner at 6 p.m., nobody will think anything, right? But you're supposed to have your dinner in the evening, right? 5, 6, 7 p.m. If you have your dinner at 3 a.m., people will think that's strange, right? They'll think it's odd.
It has also something to do with culture, because in some other parts of the world, it's normal to do that, but then when you do those actions in another side of the world, you're completely different.
And that's actually a good place to end this thing, because we're out of time, but also it sums things up, is that all of the things that we're talking about here are culturally determined, right? So when we were talking about how close you stand to someone when you talk, in some parts of the world, you stand really close and people talk to you really close up. In some parts of the world, they like more space, right? In some parts of the world, chewing with your mouth open that's fine. You're not breaking any social rules. In some parts of the world, you are, right? So all of these things have to do, and meal times, right? When food gets eaten is culturally determined. Some cultures eat quite late, some eat earlier, right? So all of these social norms are culturally dependent. And again, if you've traveled, well, obviously all of you have traveled, but if you've done any traveling outside of your country, you have probably encountered ways in which you've either broken, the social rule of the place, and you're like, "Oops, I shouldn't have done that," or you see people in the place you're in behaving differently than you've been taught, and so you kind of look at the people of this country and you think, "Wow, they're all weird. They're doing this thing, or they're not doing this thing." Okay, that's all the time we have. Thank you for being here today. I'm going to wrap it up. Bye, online people. See you tomorrow.